Welcome to A Tale of Two Scribes. I'm your host, Eric P. Bishop. This is a podcast where interesting people come and tell about the stories they've crafted. As for myself, I'm an author. I've created novels, short stories, novellas, and even poetry. If you'd like to find out more about what I've done, please go to my website, ericpbishop.com. Thanks, and enjoy the journey. Welcome to another episode of A Tale of Two Scribes. Tonight we have AC Frieden with us. Hello, AC. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's great to be on.
Thanks for coming on. We talked a little bit before we were filming, so we could say all the stuff that we didn't want to air. Basically, all the girly gossip got out.
Oh,
We took
yes,
care
of
of that.
course.
Um, First and only time, and the last time I saw you, which was the only time I saw you, was in Minneapolis, which is hard to believe. It was over 2 years ago now at Bioterrorism.
Time flies. Yes,
I'm
that was a one VoucherCon. I was at the one this year in Nashville, and we saw a lot of our mutual friends, and
Yep.
it was a great event. And I plan to go to the next one in New Orleans in September next year.
Mhm.
Um, Partly also because it lines up with my character and my books that are rooted in New Orleans.
Yep.
So all the stars are lining up, so I've got to prepare for that one.
So yeah, I want to go. We'll say I'm tentatively thinking I'm going to go.
Yes.
It's going to hit in a bad weekend, I think, again, like it normally does. So I'm going to try because it's New Orleans. Because for me, um, I have history there. I've only been once, but I went a couple years ago when Boucher Khan was supposed to be there, and they canceled it. So the month before, they cancel it, and I had already booked everything. I already had a lined up to meet a friend who was going to get me in a F-18 Hornet flight simulator. So
Oh, wow.
I had all this cool stuff lined up, and I was like, well, screw this, I'm going. So I still went, and I had a crucial
That was the beginning
chapter.
of COVID.
Yeah, so it was wild. I've talked about this, I think, on another podcast. It was during COVID. Um, you got down there and I wasn't vaccinated, and I have no problem with people being vaccinated or not being vaccinated, but I wasn't. And at that time, like the week before I went, New Orleans passed some kind of a rule or law, whatever you want to call it. You couldn't go in a restaurant without showing your vaccination card.
Mm.
So I was like, how the hell am I going to eat? And so you could get takeout. You could, of course, could eat at the hotel. You could go to like Cafe Du Monde and sit there and each order your food and sit literally just
Wow.
like a restaurant. That was cool. You just couldn't go sit down in a restaurant, but you could go into the store next to the restaurant with your mask on and go shopping. And I was like, this is weird, but there wasn't many masks on Bourbon Street. I will tell you that. It was Bourbon Street was Bourbon Street. It's a little wild.
Or maybe mask with a hole in it so you can put the straw.
You were putting something in through that. I'm sure on Bourbon Street. I wasn't, but other people. It was an interesting place. I've never been before. I went back through Bourbon Street, I think twice, and my overwhelming impression was it smelled like piss and alcohol, and I was good. I didn't need to go through there again. I'm like,
Yeah, I mean, I went to law school in New Orleans.
okay,
I look at New Orleans as really a truly unique American city. It's
yeah,
got everything, a lot of history, the architecture. But I think for an author, what's interesting is it has a lot of off the beaten path places
hmm,
that you can really add to your novels.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
I don't need an excuse to go to New Orleans. It's a wonderful place. The food, the history. But I always, every time I'm there, I try to find a few little things that are not something that was on my radar.
Hmm.
And the French Quarter, yes, everybody who goes to New Orleans goes there first. But actually, when I lived in New Orleans during law school, I only went there when I had visitors because there's so many interesting things outside of the quarter.
Right.
But but my book that comes out at BoucherCon next year is called Dead in the Quarter. So so
Oh
I've
wow.
got to scramble to write that one. It's a short deadline, but it continues my series.
So you've got it planned out. You just haven't actually done the slightly hard work yet.
Haven't typed a single word yet,
Ooh, living dangerously.
but it's So I just launched a book now on Friday, November 1,
Hmm.
Midnight in Delhi. So Midnight in Delhi was kind of a last minute, although I wouldn't say minute because it took 4 years to write, since my last one.
Hmm.
But it's something that I threw in unexpectedly because I was working originally on Letter from Istanbul,
Okay.
which is now going to come out in December of next year. And I had put in a lot of work into Letter of Istanbul. It was probably around 70% complete as of last year. But because of the war in Ukraine, which affects some of my settings
Hmm.
and some of the characters, it was disruptive in terms of the narratives. So I put it aside and
Okay.
realized, okay, what am I going to do, for next year, which is this year? So I decided um, to write something that would involve India. And
Hmm.
the reason that India came to mind is I did a book signing in 2019 for my previous book called The Pyongyang Option, also a thriller, the number three title in the series. Um, I did only one book signing in India, in Bangalore, at Higginbotham's, amazing bookstore, and actually one of the oldest bookstores in India. But the book had nothing to do with India, and many of the attendees said, "Well, can you ever write something about India? You spent enough time here."
Hmm.
Um, and over a 5 year period, I worked for an Indian tech company,
Okay.
and in that 5 year period, I spent a year in India,
Wow.
usually 3 weeks at a time. And I would take a weekend here, a weekend there to explore. I'd jump on a plane and go see some new place in India that
Hmm.
I hadn't seen before. Again, looking for ideas, meeting people, things that I could put into a mystery or a thriller.
Hmm.
So I thought it was just the right time to do it. Return to India next year and do some book signings with a book that actually takes place in India. In this
Hmm.
particular book, it's Delhi and Goa.
Hmm.
So that's how I came up with Midnight in Delhi, and it disrupted for very good reasons. It disrupted my planned cycle of releases.
Hmm.
Uh, but that's Midnight in Delhi.
So since you spent some, I want to talk about your life growing up in the travel because it's something that I find interesting. Hopefully, my listeners and people that watch find interesting as well. But since we're talking about India, what was your early connection there, and then being there as an adult now, what are some misconceptions of India that people have, if you don't mind telling us?
Yeah, sure, sure. So uh, I grew up in a family that moved every few years.
Hmm.
My dad was an executive for Swiss Air,
Okay.
and so I happened to be born in Senegal, Africa. Spent 6 months there, and then moved to India. And at the time, all the airline headquarters for Asia, or most of them, were hubbed in Calcutta.
Okay.
So I lived in Calcutta 4 years. Don't remember much at all, but it is my original anchor to India.
Hmm.
So as an adult returning there, it was important for me to go to Calcutta, and I had a chance to spend a weekend there. And I was on a hunt for the house that we lived in,
Hmm.
but neither, well, no one had written down where we lived. My
The
mom could not
address.
remember. So it was a futile hunt, but I enjoyed being in Calcutta again.
Yeah.
Um, but India is it's a country of contrasts,
Hmm.
enormous contrasts. Very rich society, very the culture, the language, the mixture is absolutely fascinating. So I spent a lot of time in Bangalore, which is in the state of Karnataka, and it has its own local language.
Hmm.
But obviously English is an important language, and Hindi, but it few people realize how much of a mix of cultures and language and history India is, the
Hmm.
entire sub.
Right.
Um, so again, I I try to find venues, locations that are interesting to readers because they are so rich in information.
Hmm.
Hence, New Orleans for a U.S. venue.
Yeah.
So I think India gives you it hits you on your first day there. You see all the contrasts of society. You
Hmm.
see amazing architecture. You see poverty. You see, um, everything. It's just like it spices. I mean, it just hits you. It's very, very
Hmm.
strong environment.
It's like a melting pot, because the United States is always described as a melting pot, but in a way, it sounds like India is as well.
Yes, it's a melting pot over centuries,
Yeah.
um, and of course it has its colonial history as well.
Hmm.
Um, and now I think an interesting transformation in India is the tech industry, particularly in IT,
Yeah.
and I've been in the middle of that. And it's a very, very exciting future for India to be
Hmm.
able to tap into that technology. The number of engineers that come out of Indian universities is incredible. The numbers
Hmm.
are just um, and that is a very good sign for the future. I'm very bullish about India as a future great power. It's already a great power, but
Hmm.
it's future where everyone in society can be lifted and can benefit from that. That day is coming, so I'm very
Hmm.
bullish about it.
I work here. I wish I could say I did podcasts and wrote books for a living, but ha ha ha. There's a few of those out there, but only a couple.
One day.
One day. But I have a corporate job. I work for a very large Fortune 500 company, and we actually have a division that's based in India. And actually, it's funny you say that because we had a call in the last week or two with my boss, and basically like, hey, the India division. I don't want to name the company, but the India division. Is there anything that we can transfer over to them? They're looking for growth opportunities and different that kind of stuff like that. So yeah, so we have a connection to it just with our company as well. I haven't gone over there. I think my boss said he might at some point, and I'll probably raise my hand and be like, "Hey, I'll carry your bags to go, check out and meet some of the folks I've talked to over the years over there." So,
It's an amazing place. There's so many different parts of India that are unique and very different from the others.
yeah.
So I certainly recommend you going there and seeing this incredible country.
It's on my list. I'm trying to be faithful as I'm getting older by the day. I'm trying to be faithful of getting to a couple new countries every year going forward. So this year, oh shoot, we're in November. This month, I guess, I should be in Scotland and Ireland for part of Thanksgiving. So those are two of my countries that will be on for this year. As well as, and I was going to ask you too, I think in your background, I think you spent some time growing up in the UK in England.
In London,
In
yes.
London. Okay. I'll be in London. I fly into London in 3 weeks or so, 3.5 weeks. It'll be my third time there, but I'm looking forward to. So my mom's never been, so that was part of. I reached out to her earlier this year, and every other year I don't have my kids for a week for Thanksgiving, and that's just in the last 4 or 5 years that's happened. And so I just kind of made a vow several years back of okay, the year I don't have the kids. I'm not just going to go somewhere, but I'm going to leave the country and spend Thanksgiving not in the United States. And it has to be Thanksgiving Day has to be in a country I've never been in. So this year we'll be drinking in Ireland and Dublin on Thanksgiving Day. So
That's awesome. That's awesome.
it's gonna be a
Yeah,
fun
so
one.
I lived in London when I was a teenager.
Okay.
It was the last country outside the U.S. That
Okay.
I lived in before moving to the U.S.
Gotcha.
I lived in London as a teenager, and I've worked in London as an adult many years later. Also, traveling back and forth to India, but spending some time in London
Hmm.
with teams there. And London is an amazing cosmopolitan city, offers
Yeah.
so many things. It's a pleasure to be there as well.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite cities to go to. Like I said, it'll only be the third visit, but and I'll go back and see some of the same things I've done. But because my mom's never been. Yeah, I reached out to her and I said, "Hey, this year for Thanksgiving," I think she thought I was going to say, "Oh, I'm going to come home," and I was like, "Hey, I'm going to take you to Ireland, and maybe we'll go to London too, and maybe we'll go to Scotland." And she was just like, "You sure?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's time for you to get out of the country. You're 71 now. We need to get some international travel on you because we don't have 71 more years to go, Mom. Come on, what in the world?" So,
Oh,
um,
good. That'll be exciting.
yeah, she's really looking forward to it. And then I have a cousin who's close to my mom's age. I always called her my aunt growing up. She's actually joining us. So she's like, "Hey, you mind if I come?" And I'm like, "Hey, the more the merrier." So I'll be touring around Europe with two ladies in a couple of weeks. So it should be a fun time. So let's talk about growing up. Like you touched on it already, but I think it's something that's really to bring a point to how it ties into your writing later on in the conversation. I think the travel when you're younger, it's something I have not got. I've got my kids around the United States a bunch, but not as much as even I'd like. But I haven't got them international yet. And I think from a developmental standpoint for kids, the more they can see, the more opportunities I think open up for them in their life. So talk about how the travel for you as a young person kind of affected you as an adult, even.
Yeah, so I kind of put it into two buckets. So there's travel, and then there's living abroad.
Sure.
So living abroad, I think, is um, it's a bit different. I would say a bit traumatic because you're uprooted, and
Hmm.
then you have to adapt all over again. So every 3 to 4 years is what, the rhythm was for
Okay.
me. Um,
So you just
but at
got
the same
established having friends, and all of a sudden your parents were like, "Hey, we're
Exactly.
going to we're
And
going to
there
the
was
next
no,
country."
there was no Instagram or, Facebook at the time. So it was
Right.
much harder to leave, and
Yeah.
because you really left people behind. So I think that had its drawbacks, but at the same time, yes, you're living in a different culture, different language, and you're a sponge as a kid.
Hmm.
So yes, there's a huge benefit, but there is that other element that there's a heartbreak every time you leave.
Sure.
Um, and then there's the travel piece. So when you live abroad, you tend to travel probably more, especially when we lived in Europe. Um, Destination in Europe, North Africa, was very close.
Hmm.
Um, so you have a shorter distance to experience new cultures, other cities, and so that was a very enriching experience. So I lived after India. I moved to Switzerland,
Hmm.
first in Zurich for a couple of years, and then about 5 years in Geneva.
Okay.
Um, so there, my parents decided, okay, we're gonna put Andre in an English school,
Mhm.
but at home we're gonna speak only French and Portuguese.
Oh, okay.
Um, because my parents wanted me to have English as a dominant language for my future, whatever
Hmm.
that future was.
Right.
And then eventually we moved to London, so that English training in Switzerland was, I guess, kind of useful. Uh, and then after London, out of the blue, my dad came in one day to my room and said, "Hey, we're moving to Florida in about 2 months." Um, and then he closed the door. So no one asked for my opinion, but okay. So we moved to Florida, and again, my English language experience going back to Switzerland was also very useful there.
Yeah.
Although the English accent did not earn me very many friends in the beginning. So
Ah.
maybe today it would be extremely popular to have
Yeah.
British accent, but Central Florida, 1980. No.
No.
So I did everything possible to lose the accent
Okay.
as quickly as possible so I could have friends. Yes, there was a direct relationship between the two.
Yeah. That totally makes sense. Yeah. I 100% see what you're saying when it comes to travel versus, and I have several close friends that were military brats basically. And so very
Very
similar
similar.
experience. Yeah, where they're, a year or two and hard to keep friends. You're not super excited and you're also depending on where it is, you're not always going to the most glamorous places. For your and you're living on a military base when you get there.
Yeah. So
So
that was a little bit different for my experience, right? But
yeah,
what was strange though, especially in Switzerland, is I went to an English school called the Geneva International School.
okay.
Um, well, Geneva English School first, then Geneva International School. And most of my classmates were kids of diplomats, executives that were based temporarily in Geneva.
Hmm.
A lot of UN agencies are based in Geneva. So, um, so I had two completely different sets of friends.
Hmm.
Those from school and then the locals, right? In my
Yeah.
neighborhood, in the city, in my judo class, whatever, right? So it was, I lived almost like a double life, right?
Hmm.
And those two communities of friends didn't mix,
Did
right?
mix, yeah.
So it was a really strange environment, and but enriching in its own way. But it was an unusual environment.
So I went to Switzerland in 1996. I was on it was between my freshman and sophomore year of college. They had a tour of Europe. It was actually a history tour. It's called the Reformation History Tour. So it kind of followed the Reformation of the
Yes.
Protestant religion, basically. And one thing that kind of found striking to me is we started a morning. I forget which day of the week it was, but we started in Milan, and then we went over the Saint Bernard Pass, which is where Napoleon went over with his elephants.
Mhm. Yeah.
Back in the day, had a snowball fight, and then we ended up in Switzerland. And the thing I've told people over the years was what was telling to me, and I love Italy. I've been back to Italy multiple times now. Haven't been back to Switzerland yet, so I need to get back there. I'm way overdue for Switzerland. I write about it a lot, but I've not made it back. But if I had dropped food in Italy that morning, I probably would have left it on the ground and just been like, ew. Versus that afternoon or that evening, if I dropped something on the sidewalk in Switzerland, oh, there wouldn't have been a 5 second rule. I would have picked it up and ate it. It was so clean. It was such a beautiful country. So it was funny the kind of the contrast. And Italy is amazing. I love Italy, but Italy to Switzerland when it came to the cleanliness, it was like, cleanliness is next to godliness a little bit. This is kind of nice. So,
It is. I mean, Switzerland is beautiful. It's blessed with an amazing topography with
yeah.
the Alps, and the Jura Mountains on the west side on the French border. Yeah, it's a beautiful place. I enjoyed all the years I lived there, and I still have my Swiss passport, and I go there as often as I can.
Now, so after your stint in Florida, is that where you actually finished up high school and everything? Did you in the United States?
Yes.
Okay.
So I finished high school. But I finished high school early so I could go back to Switzerland and serve in the army.
Okay.
So Switzerland has a draft.
Yes.
And it still has a draft today, while a lot of other European countries got rid of the draft. But at the time, if you lived abroad, you didn't have to serve.
Oh, okay.
Um, so I lived in Florida and would have, legally not have had to serve. But
Hmm.
my father did it during World War II.
Okay.
So in the 3 years of World War II, he was mobilized
Hmm.
and essentially waiting for the Germans to invade Switzerland, which
Right.
never happened.
Yeah.
Um, and then my grandfather did it. A lot of my close friends in Switzerland did it.
Hmm.
So I wasn't going to, use the law to my advantage and not do
Yeah.
it. So I volunteered, I went back, and I served in a motorized infantry unit
Okay.
and trained as a sniper.
Wow.
Really loved it. It was hard. I would say I wouldn't do it again at the age that I went. I went in at 17.
Okay.
So in Switzerland, you can't drive unless you're 18. Um, so I should have waited an extra year. Most
Hmm.
people who go to the army in Switzerland are 19 years old. I think that's the average.
Yeah.
Um, so I should have waited, but I was impatient and I wanted it out of the way in order to start college in the
So,
US.
yeah. To get on with yeah. Yeah, those the laws are kind of interesting. I have my son's 17, so he was the age you were when you went back to Switzerland to serve. My daughter just turned 13, and we were having a discussion last time I had them, kind of about rules and regulations and how there's this, here in the United States, probably, and like with other countries, there's all these variances. So as you well know, you grew up, here and graduate here is so at 18, you can go get married, you can buy yourself a rifle, you can join the army, you could do some pretty significant things. I think you can buy tobacco, I believe, at 18, although I'm not a smoker. So I think at 18.
You can't drink, but you can get on a plane and go to Mexico or Europe.
Right. And that's where the discussion ended up
Yeah.
going. It's like, so you can go get married, go have a kid, have a
Yes.
3-year-old or almost 3-year-old, and you still can't go buy an alcoholic beverage in the United States. And
Yeah.
it's like, that's maybe there should be
Well, I
a
think,
loophole for some
yeah.
of those things.
So when I lived in Florida, went to the army in Switzerland. In Switzerland you can drink at 18.
Right.
And then I came back to Florida where I couldn't, right?
You couldn't.
But I think the real difference is that 18-year-olds in Europe are not typically driving cars.
Gotcha.
They may drive, but they may not own a car. Fewer own cars at that
Okay.
age, or they may use a motorcycle or moped, etc.
Hmm.
But in a lot of the U.S. at that age, you absolutely need a car because
Yeah.
there isn't public transportation in many U.S. cities or towns, right?
Right.
So I think that's probably what's motivating the law to stay at 21.
Hmm. Or it could just be the wacky rules we have in the United States that
It
don't
could be.
always make
It could
sense.
be. Well, there are plenty of wacky rules.
I mean, we're,
As,
as we're filming this, we're 2 days from a major election that like half the
yeah.
country wants to kill the other half of the country, and half the
Yes.
country thinks the other side of the country is an idiot. And I'm just sitting back going, uh,
Yeah.
can Andre get me a Swiss passport? Maybe I'll get the hell out of here soon.
Well, as a lawyer, I've especially in the regulatory space, so related to technology, I've followed a lot of the changes in regulations over the
Right.
last 15 years, whether it's export controls, sanctions, and the like. And I think there's often not the proper thought behind a lot of these laws that are passed.
Hmm.
Um, it's done for other reasons, and sometimes these laws backfire.
Hmm.
So I think that's one of the problems with our legislatures, with our executive authorities, whether it's at federal or state levels. A lot of the motivation for these regulations aren't the right ones, and
Hmm.
you end up with bad regs, right?
Yeah. Well, I like I said on offline or whatever, or maybe in a message, I live in Western North Carolina, and the Carolinas are pretty. It's kind of a live and let live kind of area. I mean, there's definitely regulations for sure, but there's a lot of just kind of. It's not overbearing. Versus, I've spent a lot of my adult time out in California for work in the last 20 years, and I mean, I think there was one year and I'm not exaggerating this either. I think one year California passed 10,000 laws. Like I forget which year it was pre-COVID, I believe. But like my boss, obviously, and him and I would go out to dinner when I'm out there. We'd go to the movies and we just kind of talk about, hey, what's going on in California now? And he would just go into the legislation of, well, now this is not allowed. And a lot of it was during, he talked about firearms, what you can and can't have, and just how difficult they make it be. And the more he would tell me, the more I'm like, and he'd be like, yeah, you ever want to move out here? I'm like, I'm good. I'll come out for visits. I love this state. Yosemite is my favorite place on planet Earth, but I want to visit Yosemite. I don't want to come out here and get regulated to death. So,
Yeah.
wild stuff. Um, so let's talk about your travel in regard to your books because like I really want to get into the fact that as I was reading kind of your bio and stuff, is you're one of the few people I've ever interacted with or met that's actually been to North Korea, which is fascinating. So, do you mind talking a little bit about how that transpired and then what you saw there, maybe versus what we hear in the national media and stuff about that country?
Well, that's what motivated me the most is I wanted to see with my own eyes,
Hmm.
whether, what you hear on television, is it true? Is it partly true? So I arranged the travel. At the time, I was not yet a U.S. citizen. I was a permanent resident.
Okay.
So I went in with my Swiss passport.
Swiss passport. Okay.
Um, and but Americans at the time were allowed to travel to North Korea. They're not
Okay.
anymore. They were at the time. Um, the difference is if you went in with a U.S. passport, the North Koreans would not let you leave the capital. So you were limited to visiting just everything that was within the capital.
Interesting. Okay.
But I was with, all the others, and we were allowed. We had different tour groups, tour guides than the Americans. We were on a different floor of the hotel.
Hmm.
I'll tell you about the hotel in a second. Um, but we ended up leaving the city and going to another town called Kaesong. Spent a day and a half there, and we spent a full day at the DMZ on the communist side.
Okay.
So all the way to the demarcation line
Hmm.
where the UN huts are, but we were on the communist side. So it was an interesting opportunity to see what reality is like
Hmm.
uh, to a certain extent. So the hotel, you arrive at the airport, the shuttle bus is there with the guides or minders, whichever way you want to label them. They take you to the hotel, which is a 40-story, fairly modern building
Hmm.
um, on an island in the middle of the river. And you're not allowed to leave the compound until the next day, the next morning, when the tours begin.
Hmm.
And the tours are, a museum, a monument, all day. I mean, it's a very, very active day. You come back in the evening, they drop you off at the hotel, and then you can have your dinner at the hotel. And then there's for the rest of the hours before you want to go to sleep, there are two bars. It's a bar in the lobby, and then there's a bar on the 40th floor in the revolving restaurant that no longer revolves because they ran out of spare parts. But it's there, and
You can
I
walk around the
remember
top now if you want to get the full view.
you can walk around. I mean, yes, um, and what I noticed is that there's heavy, heavy drinking involved on the 40th floor in
Mm,
that revolving restaurant because there's nothing else to do. You can't leave the hotel.
right.
Um, so one of those nights, there was a French tourist in my group who, at the table, said, I know a friend who a few years ago did the same tour, and let's go down to the fifth floor. I think sixth or fifth floor, because I heard there's a hidden floor in the hotel.
Don't do it.
It's not so hidden because in the elevator you see that it skips a number.
Hmm.
So that's unusual. But the reason is, and this was 2009.
Okay.
Um, so long after, or long before it was public, that information. But anyway, he told us, and we had enough to drink where we were, very brave. So we
Liquid courage,
we
baby.
of course. So we took the fire escape, the stairs, all the way down from the non-revolving bar. Arrived on that floor. The door was unlocked. We walk in, and it's like in that movie with John Malkovich. The floor is lowered, um, and there are propaganda posters everywhere on the walls. And only one room was unlocked. So we opened it, and it was a studio. Now, kind of run down, no equipment, but just desks and chairs. And what it was a surveillance floor. So whenever there were important delegations staying at the hotel, that floor would be manned by people who would just listen in to the microphones, right? That are
Wow.
probably, under my pillow or, in the TV or in the walls. Um,
Definitely in the
so
shower too. So
yes,
you're on
in the
YouTube.
shower, and so so that's what that floor was for. So we roamed around a little bit. And then we, with all those drinks, we had to lug it back up to the 40th floor, and that was a tough part. That was the riskiest part, was getting a heart attack on the way up. Um,
Jeez.
but years later, that floor became known for being the start of Warmbier's unfortunate demise. So he was the American tourist who traveled to North Korea.
Mm.
And his problem started on that floor where there was video of him trying to pull down one of the propaganda posters,
Oh, wow.
presumably to keep as a souvenir.
Yeah.
So when you go to North Korea, you have to behave, right?
Yeah.
There are certain things that you can't do.
Right.
So unfortunately, that led to his experiences, and unfortunately to his death when he returned to the U.S. In a coma. Um,
Mm.
but it was that floor.
So
But
North Korea doesn't monitor this program. So I want to see the poster you took. Where is it? Come on, it's got to be off camera somewhere.
no, I behaved.
You don't want to be tortured to death.
I was so such an ideal tourist.
Yeah, very
Um,
good.
but it was an interesting experience, and as often, as they try to hide some of the uglier parts of the place. um, and we had very nice tour guides and minders, and
Mhm.
when you took pictures of something that portrayed the country poorly, they would come to you and say, hey, can you remove that picture, right?
Interesting. Okay.
um, and if you got along well with them, they would just trust that you would
That
remove
you would
it.
do it. Yeah.
If they didn't know you well in the tour group, then they would take the camera and digitally remove the picture that was taken.
Okay.
um, but they can't hide everything, and it was really interesting
Mhm.
to see it. Pyongyang is a modern city, and this was 2009. Today, from what I've seen in the pictures, it's a much even more modern city than it was in 2009. There have been a lot of investments.
Mhm.
Where you see the struggle of the North Koreans is really in the rural towns, the
Yeah.
villages, and you cross many of them as you head south to the DMZ and to Kaesong. And that's where, I think the average North Korean would dream to live in Pyongyang,
Mhm.
because the other cities are not so developed.
That's yeah.
Um, but what I would say is everything is relative. And there is strong political control in North Korea. It is, very much a police state. But at the same time, I think when you think of poverty, for example, right? I have seen worse poverty outside of North Korea.
Mhm.
So again, the more places you visit, the more how things are portrayed kind of resonate, right?
Right.
So um, that who's better off? Someone who is extremely poor in Honduras, right? One of the poorest countries in the Americas, or
Mhm.
someone in a village in North Korea.
Yeah.
I can't say that there's a huge difference,
Right.
right? So, um, so I think that was an educational piece um, uh, that I got out of that trip.
Mhm.
You also see museums, you also see monuments. They're very big on monuments. Um, and I think that influences my writing as well,
Mhm.
because what I want to do, the number one thing in my writing is, obviously I want to entertain. I want to write exciting thrillers, but at the same time, I want to inform.
Mhm.
And the way I inform is I stay away as much as I can from stereotypes,
Mhm.
because once you establish a book, a narrative where you choose one side over another, A is good and B is bad,
Mhm.
right? I think you're locked in. And I write
Sure.
for global audiences. I write for audiences that want to learn as much as they want to be entertained,
Mhm.
right? So I don't want to vilify a particular group just because of their nationality, or just because today's news are vilifying them, right? So
Yeah.
I'd like to go several layers deeper, so that we start understanding who are they, who are the leaders, who are the average Joe on the street,
Hmm.
to really get a sense of what's going on. And I've done that with Midnight in Delhi because I think India is going through a geopolitical transition as well, right?
Okay.
In terms of it's a growing power,
Hmm.
and it has, you know, different intellectual factions within Indian society,
Hmm.
right? Where will India belong in the future? Does it need to belong into a particular camp? Can it stay as a modern version of the non-aligned movement from the Cold War, right? Can it be in the middle? Can it be friends
Hmm.
with everybody, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there is this very healthy, I think, discourse between the different powers in Indian culture, both within India and in its diaspora, right, that are trying to figure out what's India's place in the future. So I have that discussion, that discourse through the characters of
Hmm.
the book. So one of the key characters in the book is an old guard of Indian society. He's the director of the Intelligence Bureau, which is the equivalent of the CIA. Right? So
Hmm.
he's an important character in the book, and he stands sort of for the traditional non-aligned Indian centric nationalist view, right? And then there are other heads of different agencies, and they're in a room and they're chatting, and the others have kids and friends and cousins all over the world, a lot of in the U.S. And they have very different perspectives
Hmm.
of India. So I bring in that short scene in a chapter. I bring that out, right?
Hmm.
So that's what I want to do is I want to entertain, but I also want to inform,
Yeah.
right? But not throw a particular opinion at the reader,
Right. Not
right?
preach at them. Yeah.
So, and I do that with all of my books, and they're all, it's the geopolitics, it's the espionage element. I put a lot of tech things in there as well because I know how things are in
Hmm.
cybersecurity and the IT industry. Um, but I also do some very simple things. In Midnight in Delhi, there's a scene where the main character, Jonathan Brooks, is needs to meet somebody in India, and someone from his office in New Orleans has arranged it. Um, and the only way to get him that information is not through some tech gadget, but it's actually the other character in New Orleans sends him a text message with one line for each letter, and he knows that information, right? So the partner in your office, the first letter of the first name of the partner in your office next to you, right? Um, the name of your first dog, the first letter, right? So low tech, but an uncrackable code, right?
Right. Exactly.
So and that goes to sort of the bigger picture is that even though my story for espionage, I don't want to drown the reader into high tech, tech focused everything. There's
Sure.
a mix, right? There's some things that are high tech and there's some things that are really low tech,
Hmm.
human. So that's the mix that I like as well, not to bury people in technology.
Have you found that the places you visit are then become the place settings for where you're going to go with a future book, or do you figure out places you haven't been, go visit so that you can base a book in those locations?
I say more the latter.
Okay.
Um, I've been to so many really interesting places that I haven't put in a book yet. Um,
Gotcha.
but it's all there,
Yeah.
everything down to whatever brochure I put in a box, every travel I go to, everything that I keep, not just receipts, but just anything I pick up, I will put
Hmm.
in a box for a later day that I can use, either present day or something going backwards in time that I can use in the book. Right. So
Yeah.
I have a whole storage, separate storage unit. A whole corner of it is these boxes, right,
That's
from all
awesome.
my travels.
Very, very cool. Yeah, I've got a idea for a scene for my next year, my book that's going to come out next year. That I'm about third of the way done, and I work on it here and there, and now I'm going to dive into it more in the next 2 3 months. But there's a scene I want to write that takes place in Ireland. So I've already told my mom,
Oh, that's
hey, we're go- tax write off first of all, but also we're gonna. I need to get to this spot because I want to write a chapter that's totally, and I know why I
that's
need that
awesome.
chapter
Yeah, but
for that
that's
book.
great to have these. I think it's important to have a list of things that you want to go see,
Yeah,
but also to be open to opportunities when they come
sure.
up. So, for example, in 2009, I haven't included this in my book, but I want to, or a variation of it. There was a coup in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. So I immediately booked my flight and flew down there. 2 days after the coup was the fastest I could get down there.
Hmm.
And I stayed at the hotel right next to the presidential palace that was
Okay.
still manned by soldiers. And what was interesting, there's a mall across from the hotel. So um, early morning, the mostly the students would throw Molotov cocktails in front of the hotel, and then it would die down around lunchtime. So then you could cross and go to the mall, shop around, have a coffee there, and come back before the Molotov cocktails would fly again around 5 or 6 in the afternoon.
Before they
Um,
fly again.
you know,
Uh,
so there are these opportunities to take advantage of, but I still
right.
haven't put that one in a book yet.
See stuff like that. Yeah. So I had a similar experience. And you talk about just going back to New Orleans. So I had mentioned, that I ended up going down there because Boucher Con, which got canceled. So one of the nights I was there, I'm by myself. I don't know anyone around there. I know people there now that I could go hang out with since I've been writing or since I've been published and all that. Um, but I decided to go on a ghost tour. I saw a flyer for a ghost tour. I was like, sure. So I get on the ghost tour, and there's like probably about 15 or 20 people on the tour. Well, I'm the only loser that's by themselves. So it's either couples or families or whatever.
Nighttime or daytime?
Night tour.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
best one.
Oh, it was so much fun. It's so, and I'm not really a ghost believer. Might be a little bit to it, but well, so I end up kind of interacting with the guy that's leading it, the tour guide. Super fun guy. End of the night, he's just like, he knew I was there by myself, getting ready to fly home the next day or whatever. 2 days later, it's like, hey, we want to go where the locals hang out and grab a drink. I was like, yeah. So we're not going to some pirate bar, basically there, a couple blocks from Cafe Du Monde. Closed the place down. And I met a couple of the other guys, musicians. So we're just all sitting there, and I'm talking about the writing aspect of it. They're talking about the music side, and the other guy was talking about taking people on ghost tours. And it was just this, from what I can remember from all the alcohol, it was just all these cool stories that got kind of blended in, and my brain just kept saying,
Yes.
remember some of this stuff for 5 years from now when you go set another book in there. You can use these real world things that happened and give them to one of your characters. And I'm sure for you as well, it's great to fictionalize things that have happened in your past to kind of keep them, keep that experience alive for your readers, basically.
I think that's one of the common traits of all fiction authors, or crime fiction authors in
Hmm.
particular, is we're sponges, right?
Yeah.
We're absorbing everything possible so that we can, find an interesting angle that we can throw it back into a book, right?
Right.
So I'm always on the lookout for that. Even in the most unexpected, unusual places, it'll hit me, you
Yep.
know. I think I can put this in somewhere in a book, and I'll even email myself so that I don't forget which book. I'll email it. Book 12. I'll put it in an email so that later I'll be able to find it in the emails.
Hmm.
So I think that's definitely and I think it makes us um, really attentive to detail, right? Because we're
Right.
searching for that information,
Yeah.
right? And I think it's a really enriching experience to to pay attention, to listen.
Yeah, I was the 2 years ago when I was in the UK. I was in Wales for the first time, or only time, but it was in Cardiff, Wales, and one of the folks I met, she said, "Hey, you want to go to a cafe and grab a drink?" I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. Let's just go grab a coffee." So we go down, and just this everything about that environment was just a story to me. So, we parted ways. I actually went off to watch a rugby match because I had never been to a rugby match. So I was like, well, I'm here. They were playing Australia. So Wales was playing Australia in the rugby match, which is, as big as a football stadium in the United States, massive stadium. So I go over there and watch it. Well, I realized besides the rugby being a cool experience was that cafe things about it just clicked with me. So when I got back from the United States to the United States after that trip, I wrote a chapter about two characters in that cafe, and I kept it fairly generic so I could use it. And I've already got it now in a future book ready for it,
Mhm.
but I just had to tweak a few things, and I'm making like a bad person one of the people that's there, and totally fictionalized it. But it was one of those moments that was just kind of like you're looking around going, this would be a good scene for a book. Okay, well, I'm here. I'm a writer. So why don't I just tell this story of this experience and we'll just tweak it a little bit so it's not really what happened. It's kind of sort of what happened.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to find these details. It's the authenticity that we are as we're presenting as authors.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's the value add for our readers is we will go that extra mile
Hmm.
to have some genuine experience that we are putting into a novel. Yes, we may change a few details, but we've lived it, we've seen it, we've smelled it, we've looked at it, right? So all these things are important
Hmm.
as authors.
Yeah. No, I love that kind of stuff. And I think you're going to experience things in life. So if you can take some of those experiences you have and you can make a good story around it as an author, it's like, why? You're going to make up a lot of the story, obviously, but why make up 100% of it? Why not make up 80%? Put 20% real stuff in. And the part of real life that's boring, or fictionalized part of it, it's fine. No one knows.
Well, we still have to write fiction, right? So
Maybe.
there's always an element that's going to be fictional, but you can take a lot of reality into it. And I think that's the approach that I've had with my books is yes, the stories are fiction,
Hmm.
the plots are fictional, but there's a very real element to the settings, but
Right.
also to the narrative behind the story, right? Whether it's the geopolitical issues. Midnight in Delhi is taps into two things. One, the geopolitical challenges for India that we talked about earlier,
Hmm.
but also bioterror. Right? It's a bioterror plot.
Yeah.
And the my in my previous life before I was a lawyer, I was a molecular biologist.
Mm.
So I studied and lived in a lab. Didn't particularly like it. It wasn't what I wanted for the rest of my life, but I spent the time there.
Right.
Um, but I understand this technology very well. And to me, I'm concerned by the developments that we're seeing in genetically engineered
Mhm.
elements to disease prevention that can also be used as offensive methods.
Right.
Uh, so I've weaved that into the story, and there's several chapters dedicated to Indian scientists trying to uncover what's going on.
Okay.
But it's a fascinating area and a very real danger for our world
Hmm.
in the years to come.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the advent of nuclear technology and everything that's kind of followed since then have put us in such a precipitous place. And I mean, yes, you could die a couple hundred years ago, but you couldn't do something that was going to not, apart from having an army and going out and slaughtering people, you couldn't really do anything that would just annihilate an entire country. Where now it's not that difficult of a thing to do.
Yeah.
Hopefully, there's safeguards that can keep it from taking place, but the technology is there that would allow you to lob talk about North Korea earlier. North Korea has
Yeah.
the capability of hitting the west coast of the United States with a ballistic missile, and they've got nukes they can stick on one of
Yeah.
those. Now, how do we
Actually,
not do that?
now they have ICBMs that can reach pretty much all of the U.S.
Yes. So, really, in many ways, a scary, premise that could come true. But yeah, it's a fascinating time to be alive. The other thing I want to touch on too before we wrap up is I love that I love when I interact with authors that aren't just sitting on their couch writing a story, fictionalizing everything. You're actually going out and doing some of this amazing stuff that you write about. So you're also a pilot. So talk a little bit about your flight. What's
Yes.
how did that come about? What are you doing with it? Are you trying to put Tom Cruise out of business? I mean, what's going on here, Andre? Come on.
Yeah, so I was influenced by my dad, who was in the airline industry,
Hmm.
and I think I don't remember exactly. I was living in San Antonio at the time, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to start taking piloting lessons. So I took flight lessons at a place, I don't think it's in business anymore, called Wright Flyers at San Antonio International Airport, um, and did most of my training there.
Okay.
And then it was a time that I moved to Dallas, and I got my private pilot license in Dallas at a very busy corporate airport called Addison Airport. And since then, I've had just a love of flight.
Hmm.
So I've since gotten my seaplane rating.
Hmm.
Um, by training in Minneapolis,
Okay.
outside of Minneapolis, Lino Lakes. And I love float planes. Seaplanes are my favorite.
Hmm.
I also have about half the hours for helicopter rating. Um, and I've flown all kinds of planes. I've had aerobatics training out in California. I've flown seaplanes in Italy, in
Hmm.
Como, which I think is the only seaplane training facility in Europe. But I love it for one reason in particular. I find it peaceful. I
Yeah.
find the being in the air cut off in many ways from the world,
Hmm.
um, and just a feeling of freedom and peace. Uh, and 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 I think that's also why I learned to scuba dive, because
Hmm.
again, it's another place where I find tranquility.
Yeah.
Right? No emails, no phone calls. You're really just on your own, and you're at peace.
Yeah.
So those are my two hobbies, and I think it's just that search for tranquility,
Hmm.
and peace that you get from those two experiences.
I went parasailing one time, probably about over 10 years ago now, and I thought it was different from what I thought. I actually loved every second of it, but I thought it was going to be up in the air and it's loud. It's that you could
Super quiet.
whisper, and it was so magical. And then the only time I've actually flown, and actually the my book that's coming out in December, my uh guy that lived across the hall from me during my sophomore year or junior year of college. I can't remember now. One of the years of college, he was a pilot. He was going for business aviation degree, and so I went by his house one summer in between years, and he was like, "You want to go flying?" I was like, "Heck yeah, let's go flying!" So we were up in Culpeper, Virginia, and so we took a little Cessna from Culpeper up to one of the DC, or not one of the big airports, but one of the smaller airports outside of DC. Not far away. It's an hour drive.
Mhm.
So, 20-minute plane ride, basically 25-minute plane ride. And then we had to bring another plane back. Phenomenal experience. He kind of gives me the running
Yes.
around, how it works, whenever. When we get up there and he goes, "You want to fly it?" I was like, "Yes, I do." Uh, Totally. So when I was writing Babylon Will Rise, I needed a pilot, and I was like, you know what? It's time to put Mickey in and give him.
Awesome.
He's going to fly to a mega group around the world, basically. So I just worked on the acknowledgments the other day, just kind of fine tuning them, and I made sure that I got some of the details right there about Mickey. But one day I'll get my private. Yeah, I don't know when. The everything else in life right now is keeping me occupied, but at some point things will chill. Maybe when the kids are grown. I'll probably, start my next venture in life, and one of those things is to probably pursue that. Because yeah, I agree with you. When you're up there, and I've flown a lot for work. I haven't flown nearly globally what you have, but I've definitely done some travel. I tell you what, I'm like a kid every time I get in a plane. I'm never on a
Yeah,
plane and like, get me off this thing. I'm always on there and like, I want to sit by the window. I want to look.
yes.
I'm the annoying person taking a picture. I probably have 5,000 pictures of engines and clouds and stuff, but it's like, this is an amazing, for most of humanity, you were walking or you were riding on the back of something. Now you can climb on this little aluminum cylinder and you can be in Europe in 7 hours, 8 hours. It's like, it's pretty freaking cool. I don't have to take a boat for 4 months. I don't have to die of dysentery on a boat. This is great. So,
No, it's an amazing experience, and and I've spent most of the time piloting Cessnas.
okay,
I mean, essentially Volkswagens with wings.
basically.
But a few times I've flown more modern planes like the Diamonds, and those are kind of like the Ferraris.
Yeah,
And then I've flown old relics, World War II planes. I've been in a World War I biplane.
biplane. Yeah.
Um, those are a little bit riskier, so I don't fly those that often.
Hmm.
But yeah, the Cessnas are the go-to plane for most of my flights.
Yeah. Yeah, again, it's one of those fun experiences. And I try to tell people that I interact with is get out there and try something different. And I tell to my kids all the time, you might not like it. And you know what? It might make you scared. And as long as you do it safely, um, try stuff. And then if you don't like it, you don't have to do it again. But you do have to. I always tell my kids that you gotta try it once. Try it once, and then I'll leave you alone if you didn't like it. But like a good example, real quick, would be just completely commercial touristy thing. But about 4 years ago or so, we were up in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and I said to the kids, "Hey,
Oh,
you
that's
want
a
to fly?"
great place.
Yeah, I said, "You want to fly in a helicopter?" They're like, "Maybe." So we went up to one of the touristy helicopter. But I had never been in a helicopter, and I was really worried about my daughter. My daughter, especially at the time, not a risk taker. Kind of. She's cool with the couch, not cool with 2,000 feet up there. Spinning around. So we were waiting in line to get our turn, and I said to her, I was like, "Hey, you can sit in the back with me in the helicopter. My son Bruce. Bruce can sit in the front. I don't care where I sit. I'll be next to you." Well, we go to get up in the helicopter, and you don't get to choose where you're sitting. So I put my daughter up in front with the pilot, put my son and I in the back, and it's like a 10, 12 minute, 15-minute flight, and we come back and we land, and I'm expecting her to be like, just like ready to sock me because how
What
dare
did
you?
you do to me? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, she gets out of the hip hop, turns on some. She goes, "Try again." I'm like, not really. I kind of shot my wad on that one. That was our money for the day. Yeah, we're not doing that again. But we went back and did it again the next year or 2 years later, though, and it was and it was great because it was like, and then I took them. There's a place up in Charlotte called iFly, indoor wind tunnel, indoor skydiving. Again, one of those things where I was telling them about it, and they're like, "It sounds interesting." Oh no, my daughter was like we would do this every week, Daddy, and I'm like, at $150 a pop, we can't do this on a weekly basis. So, but it got her out experiencing different things, and I think that's part of my job as a dad is to try to expose the kids to stuff and stuff that I never got exposed to. I did that a lot with my son with music. We've gone to a lot of concerts the last couple of years. Um, I know he likes music. I like music, and it's something I never did as a kid very much with my parents or at all with my parents. I did it with friends. So it's like, hey, if I can find that connection, you don't know. And now then my son's taken off where he's gotten into bluegrass in the last year. He's really dived into playing bluegrass. His tutor is one of the top bluegrass guitarists in the nation. Just happened to work out that kind of the stars aligned, and that's who is his private tutor now. And I go back and tell the kids, a year ago, if I had said that was going to happen, you would have said that's not possible. It's like that's where, and I kind of tell that people with writing stuff, and they're like, "Oh, it's so discouraging," or "The industry is so hard," or "Self publishing is so hard." It's like it absolutely is. But those people that get that level of success, those people that get those 7-figure deals, all these other things that people look at as that shining monument of what you need to have. A, it might not be as important as you think, but B, if you want to get that, guess what? It's going to work. Write a good
Yeah,
book.
absolutely. And
If your
don't give
book's
up.
not good enough, write another one.
That's the most important thing is if you feel passionate about it, just keep going.
Keep going.
Keep
Yeah.
going. Right. I do the same with my daughter, and she was reluctant to try Taekwondo years ago,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which I had done for years, and sure enough, she loved it, and she's only 3 or 4 months away from getting her black belt, and
Yeah, it's awesome.
yeah, so we as parents, offer transformative experiences for our kids. We just have to show them, and maybe they'll like something, maybe they won't.
Right. I know you want to ask me a couple questions, but before we get there, I want to ask you one final thing, which is how I wrap up most of my side of the interviews on this thing. Is I think you'd agree with me that life is like a book. We've got a first page, we've got a last page. None of us know how many pages are in between, which is probably a good thing. But Andre, you're a writer. You have written a plethora of books now. You get to write your last page. What would you want that last page to say that you're getting to write?
Um, did I contribute to the betterment of society in some way, right? Whether it was many people or one person or a small number of people, right? Ultimately, I feel like my writing and my life should be to leave a mark,
Mm-hmm.
contribute, right, to the next generation, to the current generation. So that's what I would put. You know.
Amen. I, I think sometimes people get caught up, especially in the global technological world we live in, that you have to be this massive presence to actually leave a mark in the world. And it's like you don't actually. Some people do, but that's the exception to the rule. Man, if you're just a good dad, if you're a good husband, if you're a good friend, you're a good son, daughter, whatever, and you touch a few lives,
Mhm.
that's pretty important. And also, you don't know by touching those lives the spider effect of what's going to happen from
Yeah,
those interactions.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
cool.
What would you put? What would you put for your last page?
I haven't really answered that one yet.
Well, you have to be prepared to answer a question that you throw out.
I know, shouldn't you? Actually, it was thrown out to me at one point, and my laughing joke answer would be he wasn't an asshole, which is not a good answer, especially if my kids watch this. They're like, "Dad, you can't say words like that." So
Oh,
that's
that's
my
that's what I would if I could write a nonfiction about my legal career. That would be my last page, right?
um,
Because in my legal career, you see, the full spectrum
yeah.
of in our profession.
Yeah, no, for me, I think very simplistic of, you know what, he was a good father, he was a good son, good brother, good friend. Um, we're here for such a short period of time. I'm a few days out from turning, as we're filming this, I'm a few days out from turning 48, which every year, this last several years, when I thought I'm in my 40s, slightly freaks me out a little bit. And that's not that old. And I know it's not that old, but when I was 16, I thought that was that old. And now that I'm getting close to 38, I'm just like, really? I'm here already? Really? But it puts things in perspective, and for me, um, part of me, and I've mentioned this in other podcasts, of part of my last page and what I'm getting to leave behind is hopefully a volume of books. And what I tell people is it's a fictional story. There's a little slice of my soul in every story I put out.
Yeah,
So if you
absolutely.
if you want to know who I am, and it's not a marketing ploy, but because get them for free at the library, or I'll send people arcs of free books sometimes. But if you want to know who I am, read my books, and then part of you does live on. Versus like I mentioned earlier, I work for a corporation and I work for a good company. My boss takes care of me. I have a good life. But the day my corporate job ends, either they let go of me or I move on to something else, it's gone. There's nothing there to even show my kids of what I did for 20 years of
Yeah,
my life. Versus when I write a book, as long as the EMP doesn't go off and destroy the digital versions and the nuclear holocaust doesn't happen and burn the paper versions, for quite a long time, it's very possible that my books will still be out there for people to read and my family to have and my grandkids and great grandkids. To me, man, that's power. That's your legacy right there for me.
Yeah. Well, you can always build a bunker and put a copy of each of your books in the bunker, right? To be discovered one day.
There are
Um,
a few
if-
nuclear Trident silos for sale on the internet. That if you want to go in with me and get one, maybe we'll split.
sure. I mean, they're only a few $100 million, but yeah, we'll figure it out. Yeah. But actually, I have one book in mind that I'd like to close out my writing career, and that's a book about my father in Africa,
Mm,
because he spent 15 years
mm,
in really remote places in Africa. He was the true living Indiana Jones,
wow.
um, and I want to take that as a fiction, not a crime fiction, but just a separate literary fiction, a fiction story that I'd like to write where we are both the same age.
Mm,
So there's a fantasy element to it,
sure.
but I think a lot of a lot of guys have thought, wow, would I have been friends with my father if we were the same age?
Right.
What would have been the dynamic there? And it's a way to encapsulate his legacy as
Hmm.
well. That's that will be my final literary project if I can get to it.
Well, don't wait too long. Just because
No.
you don't know,
What
and
do
I
you
don't mean that in
say?
a negative way, but don't think you're going to write it one day and then
Well, that's true. That's true. You have to carve out the time to do it. Yeah.
and then you're getting that last Cessna. I mean, you don't want something like that. So make sure
Exactly.
start putting crumbs there for you to have
Yeah.
that. Yeah, the word we get to follow our passions, which I think so many people in this world. And there's what close to there's over 8 billion, 9 billion, whatever the number is now. I
Mhm.
can't keep track of it. There's so many people in life that don't follow their passions for whatever reason because they economically they can't afford to, or they're just don't have the education to know how to read or write. I mean, there's a litany of reasons why people can't, but we're blessed that we're actually able to take our life experiences and take the creative mind we've been given, and we're able to craft stories that first of all bring joy to us, and then hopefully bring joy to family, friends, readers. So I think in that regard, we're some of the most blessed people that have ever walked on this planet.
Yep. I agree. I think we're very fortunate.
Yeah.
And and that's another reason we should give back to society in every way that we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We just had, I think I mentioned it on the last podcast I did. If not, we just had a pretty bad hurricane come through the Carolinas. I actually had internet down for a month. I just got it back in the last couple of weeks, really. Um, it just again one of those reminders of life is precious. I was up in the area that got really destroyed bad 4 days before the storm hit. I was up there with a friend. He turned 50. We were out hiking Grandfather Mountain, somewhere we had never been before. And I called him a couple of weeks back now, and I said to him, I was like, you realize some of those roads, some of those valleys we drove, because it was about an hour and 20 hour and 30 minute drive to get there, I think some of those communities are probably gone. They're just the flooding was so bad up there. And again, to me, it was that reminder of you just don't know. You don't know. Life's precious. Enjoy those moments with those people that care about, and write those stories. Write those stories.
Absolutely.
So, Andre, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. Where can people find your books and learn more about you?
Well, my website is acfrieden.com, but also you can search on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. My latest book, Midnight in Delhi, is out in ebook and paperback. And I heard that I'm getting some really good sales in India as well, so it's a great new addition to my readership. I'm delighted that that's happening too. Um, so that's where you can find me, and I'm always very receptive to reader feedback, questions. I really enjoy interacting with readers. So that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Let's try to
But
get together.
before we end, tell me about your next book because it's coming out very soon, right?
Just yeah. So it'll. One more week. It'll air this in a couple of weeks. I'm not too far ahead anymore. So it'll come out December 5th. Babylon Will Rise. So I'm kind of going. So I did a novella last year, which is Over the Shoulder, Ransom Daughter. That was my first foray into indie publishing, just because of the way circumstances had kind of happened with the publisher I was with, and I put that novella out not knowing for sure what I was going to do going forward. And then I realized, man, I've got these stories for the Omega Group that I want to tell. So I decided, okay, I'll this fall double up. A Breach of Trust, the follow up to The Body Man, came out in June. And I said, well, let's try to see if we get another book out before the end of the year. So it's been a little aggressive and a little bit of a challenge. And I'm a little bit tired. But Babylon will Rise, and it's again nuclear concern. A lot of stuff that takes place in Iraq and some places in the Middle East. I've got a friend that actually served for 20 years in the army, and it's a completely fictional story. But I tried to use things I learned from him, especially for the characters and stuff. So I did not serve in the military. And so I have the utmost respect for those that did. And he was one that he was my roommate in college. I've told the story before, maybe not in the podcast, but to other people of there was four of us in this room the first semester of college. And that first day he walked in, I was like, this dude is an asshole, and I will never be friends with this guy. 20 I don't know, 28 years later, I don't know how many years it's been. I'm going to ignore that comment, how many years it's been. Yeah, still friends. He spent a full career in the military. Babylon Will Rise is dedicated to him. My daughter was a little like, wait, what? I said, well, this book's not going to be dedicated to you and Bruce. And she was kind of like, seriously? I was like, yeah. It's like, not, we're not getting every dedication. This one's heavily military, and I've got a few lines in there that have been uttered from my friend's mouth that I direct quoted, gave it to a character. I said, no, who's getting this one? So fun story. I'm excited to get that one out.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, again, it's a blessing to be able to do this. It's a blessing. And then next year we're gonna try for two. One for sure. If I can be aggressive, we'll try to put two more out, and then I'll probably scale back at that point. And I'm also we talked offline about it a little bit, but I'm on the indie side now, but not anti big publisher. I've got one story in particular that probably won't be able to write for another year. I'll push that one through an agent and a publisher if I can, and that one I think could be something if I can write what I'm dreaming up. So I'd kind of like to do a hybrid approach at some point because also now that I'm doing it is I like the control of going indie, being able to kind of call the shots. I do like that, and also I like the revenue side of it more. I will say that 2 years under a publisher versus 1 year of self-publishing, it was dramatically better to be self-publishing, which was kind of wild. And not have to sell nearly as many books either, which was kind of amazing. But so that side of it's kind of been a nice experience. But yeah, that's again, we're blessed people, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend this evening getting to catch up, and hopefully we can see each other in 2025.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. And thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for
And best
coming
of
on,
luck
Gary.
with your book in a few weeks.
Thank you. Take care.
All right.